there was a time of like there was times when I was like alone, like in the sense that um, yeah, kind of transitioning from like certain friendship circles that uh, were triggered um, by my change in lifestyle, um, and so yeah, before kind of like finding um, a community that was in like greater resonance to the way I was living, there was a transition of like actually being like not having any kind of connection. Um, and then yeah, I was fortunate to kind of like yeah, discover EGA. Um, well, I discovered EGA just before I went overseas, but I hadn't really connected with any of the culture there, and then I met you, and that felt supportive in a way. To just have someone to kind of be able to talk about my experiences that wasn't it wasn't so foreign to, that could provide some, so being able to kind of talk with people that had shared experiences um, was helpful. Uh, yeah. What was the question again?
Don't worry about the questions. Just keep it rolling.
Just keep rolling.
Just keep the rant happening.
Um,
Yeah. It's good. Yeah, I
yeah.
think we're doing really well.
Yes.
What do you think, Meg?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So yeah, in a way, like it was I did feel like the entheogenic or psychedelic um, culture and community here in Australia was quite supportive, but um, I kind of feel like the real benefit was actually going. I mean, the yeah, other benefits were like actually stepping into like the movement culture and seeing that as actually um, a a skill set and a toolkit to kind of prepare. When I came back from South America, like was 14 kilos lighter. I My level of empathy had kind of significantly multiplied, and so I hadn't actually learnt the skills to kind of like turn off that kind of like the gate, like the like to close off this like membrane so that I'm actually not taking in on other people, because like we're social primates, and like the mirror neuron circuitry or the empathy circuitry is like this evolutionary adaptation to feel our tribe and other kind of creatures and beings in our ecosystem, in our environment. But now that like population has exponentially grown, that adaptation, if you can't kind of like turn it off, can be quite overwhelming. And I feel like what psychedelics do is they like kind of like turn on dormant faculties in our genes as well as our neurology, and so we feel more of ourselves and then more of our environment, which is why like being out in nature is so important after these experiences, and why the city can be quite dense because of the sheer number of people that you're just walking past, and you're kind of like taking on information of their nervous system. And so I found that really difficult to be around people initially, and I feel like I'm not alone. I feel like a lot of people that have these experiences find it difficult to be around people, and how to like actually turn that empathy on and off. And so so that was a kind of a disadvantage, and also just like not feeling like I fit in to the previous kind of friend circles that I was in, and still not having the Western language to talk about my experiences, and so it just was kind of foreign to a lot of people, and not really being like I wasn't yeah, and there was, not that I felt weak, but I kind of felt a bit kind of frail. And that's where like physical training in martial arts and movement came into my life, and I didn't know that I was doing it for this. I kind of started training this because my relationship, my partner was quite ill, and I introduced her to a teacher that was rehabbing her, and I was learning about that, and it was a kind of Oriental martial arts, and I noticed that through the training of this, that getting physically strong and developing muscles, not in a type of like gym way, but in a kind of quite fluid, dynamic way, that actually created this, like, not a rigid armor, but like a way of like enforcing boundaries, or just kind of creating boundaries, that allowed me to like feel myself and feel other people, but not necessarily take it on, which is what I was kind of struggling with in the beginning. Actually, what ended up happening was actually at this property was the first time that after I came back from South America, because my teacher was like, now go back and kind of hold ceremonies for people in your concrete jungles, they can't come here. And I was still kind of young, and he's like, you have your plant allies and you have your Don, and you'll be fine. I didn't feel like I had the confidence in myself to take people through those journeys. So my strategy was to basically just take larger and larger amounts and get comfortable in that kind of like not psychosis, but just that overwhelm, and still kind of like functionally navigate that. And it was in this backyard that I did my first solo one, and had way too much, and it kind of was like an exorcism kind of thing. It popped me and decombobulated my entire body, and most of the kind of the Shipibo tradition is done in this, like, you sit in the dark and you sing songs, but you don't really move around and dance. But this process basically danced me. Like, I initially decombobulated, but then basically just like these mudras were like flowing through me, and my body was like spiraling in, it was almost like untangling these stress patterns in me that like broke this kind of character armor, this rigid kind of character armor that I had in my physiology, just I just felt like it was an embodied spiritual experience that altered just the way my body moved, and then it was like when I was taught when I started training with this martial art teacher years later, or like months later, he would show me these patterns, these martial art movements, and the way my body just kind of like metabolized them was quite quick, and it was like, how did you, most people it takes a while to learn, and I'm like, yeah, plant taught me, like, because these movements had come through me in ceremony, in my solo experiences, when there wasn't the rigidity of like certain, just like not interfering with other people's kind of experiences, because that would have been quite distracting for people if I was to have been in a ceremony. And so I was just fortunate to have the medicine available. For me, the guidance that I get is when to take it is usually when like things are crazy in my life, and I'm like, I don't want to do that now. It's like my life's already intense, and I don't feel like stable, or as stable as like in the right mindset. And then I take it, and it just like pushes me through the kind of the overwhelm of my reality, and whether it's the ordeal of going through that I then come out of it and I'm like, I got this. Like, I'm just, there's a calmness and a clarity and an understanding of like the perfection of reality that like, I'm scared when I'm about to take it. Like, even though I've had the training, when I take it, there's still an anxiety of like, I'm just about to take something that could go either way. And I'm like, I don't, yeah, so my approach to like to it is that like DMT is so versatile in like not just how it works on a neurological level, but a physiological level. That I encourage people to explore all the different ways, as long as they have a like an approach of curiosity and reverence, to do it on their own, to do it in a group. They both change the experience. So you can have the same DMT, but the doing it in a group environment compared to doing it on your own is like a subtle nuance that's not actually subtle at all. Like it definitely influences the experience of doing it with music, doing it in silence, doing it at nighttime, doing it in the day, doing it inside in an enclosed environment, doing it out in nature, doing it sitting still, lying back, doing gentle movements. Like a lot of people that tend to take DMT just think like the big initiation heroic dose is all that's kind of like the only way to do it, but I actually feel like microdosing is like sub-perceptual, so it's not like microdosing so that you don't notice anything, but it's just like really kind of trace amounts, and then sitting in meditation, and then or doing it and then doing certain breath work, or taking little amounts and like I play the didge, or like playing any kind of instrument, or just kind of doing it with the things that you are already really interested in. Like that's I feel for me what these psychedelics have done over the years is whatever skill I'm trying to develop, when I do that, when I take a psychedelic, and then attempt to do the skill, it takes me to what feels like mastery of that skill, as in like it takes me to the end of like, I don't want to say mastery, just excellence. And then from there, when I continue training whatever skill, whether it's music or whether it's physical training, I then have memory of what excellence feels like, as well as my imagination. And then I feel like that speeds up the time in which it takes to develop that skill. Does it make sense?
So especially in the early days and now, what do you experience when you smoke DMT? What sort of things do you experience? Or what have you experienced? We were talking before about the supernatural, the otherworldly phenomena. Like, how was it for you coming to terms with that?
I didn't find it that difficult, because it was like it was confirming of kind of my speculations of what reality was made up of. Pardon me. So now my experience is probably more physiological, because my life's quite when I say stressful, like challenging, and there's quite demanding, and so when I take it, it's quite a like somatic release. It's quite a like my body kind of like vibrates, and it feels like stress is like if you've ever done TRE, like trauma release exercises, where you fatigue certain muscles, so the fascia starts kind of like vibrating. Because what tends to happen is like our body accumulates stress mainly in the neck, the shoulders, and the hips, in this connective tissue, and then it calcifies and atrophies. And it's the vibration, the twitching, or the shaking that actually kind of vibrates it out. And so mainly over the past few years, it's like my consciousness doesn't really need the kind of like visionary kind of experiences. It's more somatic and physical. The psychedelics wasn't even a word that I was familiar with, so I couldn't really Google it and do any search. So I would just be talking about my experiences to people, and they're like, "You need help, man." And it wasn't until I was living in the desert and I spent some time with an indigenous elder out there, tracker, that first introduced me to a power plant that was quite revered and to them. But there was a hippie from Nimbin that was the first person when I explained my experience. She was like, "Oh, that's DMT. That was really popular in the '60s. The only place you'll find it where it's legal is Amsterdam." And so I was doing my building apprenticeship when I was out there, and I was just like, I'm following this breadcrumb, and I'm gonna go to Amsterdam. And that was where I met Maya. She's passed away now, but do you know, she gave me this like psychedelic cookbook that I showed you. Do you know the woman I'm talking about? No?
Dutch lady?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
And she and then so she mentioned ayahuasca to me, and ayahuasca had been recently mentioned like a month earlier when I was in Greece on a full moon lunar eclipse by a German guy that talked about living there in 1984, and when he mentioned it, my whole body just kind of like had this reaction, and he said, you know, I was telling him about like the kind of physical things that were happening to me as he was talking. He's like, "Oh, you should go there and take it," and it was like the words that came out of my mouth were like, "I need to go there and learn how to curate it." Like I didn't even know what curate meant, but that was there was just this like knowing, and then this woman kind of like further gave me kind of insights, and so yeah.
Maybe if you want to like take, I'll give you a sip of the bulletproof. You can.
But I had this experience. One of the things that I do, like I used to like shave my beard every new moon, whereas now I tend to bury myself on the beach. And the last new moon that I did this was on Bondi Beach, and it was packed. And what ended up happening, there was like no little pockets where I could like dig a grave, because I like fully submerge myself, usually with a snorkel, and I stand there for like half an hour. But this time I wasn't prepared, so I was just gonna like do it with my kind of face exposed. So I'm digging this grave. I find this little pocket, and it wasn't a big space, but there, I'm digging it, and usually someone comes up to me midway when I'm like quite deep, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm digging a grave," and I feel them kind of like I'm gonna bury myself, and they just kind of like are a bit kind of taken aback by that. And then when I explain the meaningfulness of it, of like kind of using it as a ritual to like align myself with the like Earth's pulse, and like bury like baggage or just like insights of like dysfunctional, neurotic, pathological, immature behaviors, and then just kind of like giving that back to the earth as fertilizer, they're like, "Wow, that sounds really beautiful." And so I'm this guy, like as I'm kind of like getting to the point where it's like, "Yeah, it's time," this guy like walks past, and goes, "What are you doing?" I explain to him, and he's like, I'm like, "Actually, because I'm like fully submerged, I need someone to actually bury me. Do you want to kind of do that?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure, man." And then when he was doing it, like because it was just like my full face was kind of like my ears are covered and it's just my face exposed. I'm like, "Can you put my hat over me so that I can, like, I'm in darkness?" And so he did that, and like 10 minutes later, the wind blows my hat off, and right in front of me is this swimsuit model, kind of like being photographed by a photographer, and like she was gorgeous, and it was just like, okay, this is maybe not one of those reflective moments. I'm just gonna like admire this beautiful woman. And then so when they're there for like maybe half an hour, and a journalist, like a film recorder, like a news reporter, is interviewing a lifesaver from the day before a guy dies on the beach, and there was like they spent half an hour trying to like get his pulse back, and so they were interviewing me for that. And then as they finished the interview, the reporter kind of sees me, and he starts recording just like this little face, my face like in the sand, and I'm like, "Where's this going?" He's like, "You're gonna be on the news tonight." And I was like, "All right." And then they take off, and then the journalist, not the journalist, the photographer and the swimsuit model kind of like, they start packing up and they walk past me and they just see this like little face, and they're like, what are you doing down there? And then I explain the ritual to them and they're like, wow, that sounds amazing. He's like, and your breath's like kind of like breaking the sand, so there's this like full halo around you. And he's like taking my shots, and then I'm like, cool, this is an interesting time. This is just like, yeah, it was, they take off, and then my process like to get out is like this full kind of like, you gotta break out. It's not like you can, if you're not using your spine and your whole body, it's quite difficult to get out of the sand. And I get out of there, and then I do this like evolutionary, like ancestral pattern from like the caterpillar to the fish to the lizard to the amphibian to mammals, and then I'm like in the water, and there was someone else on the beach that was recording it on their phone, and then they posted it on an Instagram account, and it got like 190,000 views. And a friend of mine the next day like sends me a message going, is this you? And so like someone else, it was on one of those like Instagram accounts where they just post up random weird shit, and so it was just like me doing these creatures into the water. Yeah, it was just like an interesting ritual. Sometimes that ritual's like led me to like swim with banks, other times I'm like just being filmed.